The next JavaScript file in our application is called timeline_item_timer. Let's open up this file, change extension of this file on TS, and start typing variables. So for this ref timeline_item_timer, we're going to use union type as a generic type for this function ref, like this, because value that is contained inside this variable can be either number or undefined. Because down here, as we can see, we are assigning reference of the timer created by setInterval function to the ref timeline_item_timer, and references to timers are represented as numbers. But of course now we cannot use boolean value as a default value for this ref, so if we're not going to specify any initial value of the ref, by default undefined will be used as a value. Moving on and consider the next function, startTimeline_item_timer. Let's assign type for the first parameter, which will be timeline_item_object. And on the next line, we can see that timeline_item_object can also be undefined. And in this case, we are falling back to another property activeTimeline_item. So to indicate that some parameter of the function can be undefined, which means it is optional, we can specify so by using question mark right after parameter name, like so. As we can see, type timeline_item is not found because we have to import it first, but it is currently defined inside timeline_items module. So let's extract this type from here and put it inside types.ts, because this is the module where we are grouping all our custom types. Let's add an export keyword right here, and now we are going to import this type inside timeline_items module as well as inside timeline_item_timer module. Let's just add type keyword in this import statement to indicate that timeline_item is a type. And let's continue assigning types to functions and variables. As a return type of this function, we're going to use void, since this function doesn't return anything. And there are a couple of places that TypeScript highlights in this function. That is because timeline_item variable can store value undefined. So we're going to come up with a proper solution in one of the next lessons. And for now, we're basically going to disable these errors by casting value stored inside timeline_item variable to any, like so. I have already mentioned a few times that using any type is not recommended, and we are only doing it in here temporarily, just to disable some of these TypeScript errors, because in this function, timeline_item variable can store value undefined, and that is why TypeScript is highlighting its usage. And we are basically disabling these errors by casting timeline_item variable to any. Let's also specify the return type of this closure, which is void, and move on to the next function. So in here we're also going to use void type as a return type, and to avoid TypeScript error related to active timeline_item variable being undefined, we're going to cast this variable to any. And as for this error, earlier we have specified that timeline_item_timer ref can only be undefined or number. So instead of assigning boolean value, we're going to assign undefined. And the logic in this case is not going to change, because undefined value can be converted to boolean false. And finally, we have reached the last function in this file, resetTimeline_item_timer. For this function, we're going to use timeline_item_type as the type for the first parameter. And as for the type of the return value, we're going to use void. Let's get back to the browser and click around a little bit to make sure that we haven't caused any errors by doing all those changes. And so far it's looking good. We don't see any errors in the browser. Let's continue development in the next one.